सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
You are watching a lot of coverage on G20, and over the next couple of days there's going to be much more, and you are getting all the wisdom from big Gyanis, domestic, Indian, and also from across the world. So what can I tell you about G20 that might be still of interest? So let me ask you something. Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, is going to have 15 bilateral meetings during this G20. 15. And besides this, 15 obviously have to be really important for him to do bilaterals because many more heads of states are coming. So much so that he doesn't have time even for a proper bilateral, say with the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Okay, all right, he's not our favorite leader in the Western world. Nevertheless, he's the Prime Minister of Canada. But these 15 bilaterals include a country called Comoros. Now, Comoros, let me ask you a quiz question. No Googling just now. Without Googling, tell me, where is Comoros located? What is Comoros? How big, how small, how important? What is it? And how is it so important that if Prime Minister of India can only have 15 bilaterals in these 2.5 days, why has he chosen to have one with Comoros and not with many other countries? He could have done the same bilateral with Canada or with many other countries. There are many other European countries also present, but he's chosen Comoros. Why? Now, first of all, let me help you figure out where this is located. So I can give you hint after hint. So first of all, it is in the Indian Ocean. Second, it is an African country. Third, it is in the southern part of Indian Ocean, or let me say the southeastern part of Indian Ocean. Fourth, I'm now making it simpler and simpler. It is somewhere between Mozambique, that is the Indian Ocean, eastern coast of Mozambique, and Madagascar, the big red island as it's called of Madagascar. Even then, you will not spot it unless you really enlarge that part of the map of the world. When you enlarge that part of the map of the world, you might find at least one tiny island, but maybe 4 specks, 4 tiny islands. These 4 tiny islands constitute a nation called Comoros. 3 of these islands are with Comoros. 4th of these islands, Mayotte, is right now in French possession, although Comoros claims that they own this island, it's part of their territory. So 3 of these islands, tiny islands on which no more than 1 million people. Why is the president of that island nation going to have a bilateral with Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Then I will tell you about another organization, and that's an organization called African Union. So India this time is proposing, and I think it's going to be successful, and if so, it's going to be India's big achievement, and it is something that will go in Narendra Modi government's name, and also it will check a big box for India and Narendra Modi to bring African Union into G20. So G20 to that extent will become G21. Right now it's 19 nations and also the European Union. So just like the European Union, they will be the African Union. The preliminary work has been done. Again, you will ask me, if India is moving towards helping or towards enabling African Union to become a member of G20, why is Narendra Modi meeting Comoros? The President of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, is this year the chairperson of African Union. So he has been given that honor, and that's the reason India has reached out, and that's the reason Narendra Modi government or Narendra Modi is having a full bilateral with him. Now, you might say, still Comoros, it's a tiny nation, but the fact is, when you have multinational organizations, multilateral organizations, then chair usually rotates. Before India, the head of the chair of G20 was with Indonesia. India will now hand over to Brazil. It does not make one country less or more important. Any country that's in the chair plays the role of the chair of the organization. African Union now is a sizable organization. It's an organization of 55 nations in Africa. In fact, if you see the map of Africa, this consists of almost all of Africa, barring some African nations who have been expelled or who have been suspended. Sorry, I shouldn't have said expelled, who've been suspended by the African Union. The latest of these was Niger. Niger had a coup and it had an elected government. It was deposed in a coup, so African Union suspended its membership. But if you look at the other members also, mostly they are in the Sahel region, generally in the Sahel region, and been victims of big power rivalry there and also political instability. So the nations which are currently suspended from African Union are Gabon, Niger, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Mali is where this tragic attack took place on a boat just yesterday, in which at least 49 persons were killed. Unfortunately, maybe toll may even rise. And Mali is also a nation. Mali is also an unfortunate country, which is a kind of quote-unquote Karam Bhumi of the Russian Wagner group. So many of these nations which are unstable and which have now been suspended from African Union, they suffer from the chronic instability or chronic military instability or military inspired instability that Africa has got a bad name for. So these countries are suspended, the rest are there. Look at the map of Africa. Now these are very important countries. These countries are so important that lately there's been a global tussle for the attention of Africa. So far, nobody quite bothered about Africa, but it has now begun to change. Putin lately, in fact quite recently, Putin held a summit of African leaders, a Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg. In fact, he invited all of the African leaders, but only 19 came. That is about less than 50%, less than half of the number that he had seen come for the summit in 2019. That tells us the problems that Putin's having in Africa because of the war he has launched. But the fact is that he still got 19 in St. Petersburg and he was trying to make peace with them. He was saying that, look, you are upset with me, and there are many ironies there. I shall name some for you. You are upset with me that I have stopped or I am impeding the export of grain, food grain from Ukrainian ports, because Ukraine and Russia are the biggest suppliers of the grain and edible oil that African nations need, particularly wheat. So he said, don't worry, I will send you food grain. If needed, I will send it free to you. But the fact is that while 45 came the last time, this time only 19 came. And one who was expected, a Sahel nation, but did not come, Niger. That leader had the mortification of being deposed in a coup just as the summit in St. Petersburg was ending. It was almost Putin's payback to him, because everybody knows that Wagner Group, Russian inspiration, Russian support was very critical to the coup leaders in that country. So that's where the Russians have been operating. Then see the Chinese. The Chinese route is the BRI, that is Belt and Road Initiative. They've been going to country after country, giving them generous loans. The loans are generous only to the extent that there isn't that much diligence carried out. There are not that many questions asked. There are not that many conditionalities which, say, an IMF may put for disciplining a nation fiscally, raising taxes, raising tariffs, etc., etc. In the case of the Chinese, it's straightforward. I'll give you money, I will build assets in your country with that money, and those assets will be in my possession as my collateral unless you pay back my money. And if you haven't paid back my money, then just your problem, see you later, but this stuff is mine, your asset is mine. So like that, because a lot of these African countries are in desperate need for money, and the global multilateral funding institutions make too many demands, and the Western world in particular demands better compliance on human rights, on democratic values, etc., they find it easier to take money from the Chinese. So the Chinese have been very active and very successful in this region. The Americans for some time were not that interested in Africa. They did not invest that much time, energy and emotion in Africa. But lately you've seen the Americans also. The Americans also have been reaching out. There was a summit of African leaders In the US, that's where the Americans made big promises to Africa. Also, Kamala Harris led a delegation in Africa and made big promises again. Incidentally, in the summit that the US held for African leaders, 50 African leaders participated as compared to 19 in Putin's summit a few months later. So Kamala Harris has traveled in Africa and everybody is now getting interested in Africa, as is India. India does not want to be left behind. India has been late to get started on this, but now Indian approach or Indian move in Africa is really picking up pace. And India's method is again a combination of the multilateral, that is getting African Union into the G20, but also bilateral, because India has now been reaching out to many of these countries. India has been sending delegations. Again, there's been a bit of amnesia there that we even forgot that there was a country called Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, which today holds 70% of the global cobalt reserve. Without cobalt, there can be no electric vehicles. Without cobalt, there can be no net zero. No country can dream of net zero. And while India is late, because Chinese have already got in there and Chinese are very deeply rooted in DRC, but India has also now moved in there and is trying. So India has woken up to Africa, which is a good thing. Now Africa, what exactly is Africa and why is it so significant? So Africa is not as much of a basket case as unfortunately has been projected or we may be made to believe. A lot of it through the movies, through Western media, and also because Africa suffers from the resource curse. It's because Africa has all these resources, mineral resources, but also agricultural, horticulture, wildlife resources that Western colonialists have targeted Africa 19th century onwards, particularly in the 19th century. So while Africa had gold, platinum, iron, coal, all of that, coal is not that valuable. It wasn't that valuable in the 19th century, but there were many valuable diamonds, many valuable minerals, but also wildlife products. Ivory, for example, exotic skins and hides, so many of the horticultural goods, so many of the trees that grew wild in Africa's forests. And that's what brought European powers into Africa, and that's what colonization started. And that carried on in different ways onwards. And in fact, many of the countries with very rich resources also suffered from the greatest discrimination and also the worst dictatorship. South Africa, for example, would not have been able to persist with this policy of apartheid for so long if it did not have so much gold, so much platinum, so much uranium, and so much other minerals, so much mineral wealth. So Africa has been a victim of the resource curse, and we have also seen Africa through the lens of the calamities that visit on Africa because of that resource curse. But if you look at Africa now, it today has a nominal GDP of 2.6 trillion rupees, right? It is expected to triple by the end of this century. But more importantly, Africa is the only continent where population is continuing to rise and will continue to rise, say, 25 years from now. In 25 years from now, almost in every continent of the world, population growth will be either at replacement level or below it. Even to the biggest contributors to world population, China has already seen a declining population. India is now at replacement value. Projections may be that India will still take 15 years or so for its population to decline. I suspect, however, and because all data, all evidence that we've seen so far over the past 20 years suggests that population growth in India is declining much faster than has been projected. India has always beaten the estimates. So India, China, now increasingly even Pakistan, Indonesia already is a very disciplined country. These are the countries with big populations in Asia. These countries will not be contributing to the rise in global populations. Europe will decline. Latin America will be thereabouts, maybe increase a little bit. America will increase just a little bit, but maybe all because of immigration. But the continent that will contribute to global population growth will be Africa. And that has many implications. One implication is that Africa will then become supplier of working age peoples. Now, if you look at working age peoples, and I'm looking at this data, this analysis from an Ernst & Young report, this tells us that by 2050, Africa will have 1.55 billion people, all of Africa, 1.55 billion people in the working age. The working age means between the age of 15 and 64. Now, Africa will be 1.55 billion in 2050. India will be the second according to this projection, although once again going back to what's been happening to these projections over the past 15 years, I would say it will be less than this. India will be 1.11 billion. China will be 850.5 million. That's a little less than 1 billion. That will be 180 million less than it is now, 18 crore less than it is now. Europe will be 814 million. That is 156 million or 15.6 crores less than now. North America will be 519 million, 51.9 crores plus 39 million. I told you that North America is unusual in the developed world because they'll keep on adding people, not at the same pace as Africa, not even at a fraction of the same pace as Africa. And then Latin America will add some. So demographics is one thing. Second is climate change. Africa, because of the poor governance, also because so many of the African countries are either coastal or completely landlocked and are today seeing so much political instability and have extreme weather and are also exposed to extreme weather changes because of climate change. Now, if jobs are not growing there and all these working age people are coming up, where will they go? They will then become climate refugees, and they can then flood any countries whose borders are more porous. And that is what the Western world, particularly the Europeans, worry about. So that is the one issue. That is the demographic issue. Second is the economic and mineral issue. Now, African economies are also growing. So as many other countries slow down and young population there slows down or the population ages, Africa has very young population. It's not a small population. At 1.3 billion, Africa is about 1/5 of the world's population. By 2050, it will be 1/4 of the world's population. By 2100, it will be 1/3 of the world's population. Now that population will grow and that population will have consumer needs. I will share with you a story from the Washington Post. It's done with beautiful graphics. This shows you how by 2100, some biggest cities in the world will be African. And those cities, when that kind of urban growth takes place, those cities will be big consumers of goods and services that many other countries in the world produce, and those countries include India. Next is minerals. See the amount of minerals. I told you about DRC and cobalt, but that's only one example. Look at the overall mineral economics of Africa. In the last year, South Africa pulled out $125 billion worth of minerals, the topmost. Nigeria, whose president is in India, Nigeria 53 billion, Algeria 39 billion, Angola 32 billion, Libya, water on Libya, 27 billion. These 5 countries, in fact, account for, according to Al Jazeera, account for 2/3 of Africa's mineral wealth. Now, a lot of the other mineral wealth in Africa, besides gold and platinum and diamonds and critical minerals, are the new precious metals. Tantalum, for example. Without tantalum, you can't make capacitors that run our mobile phones, laptops, automobile electronics, etc., etc. Between DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda, they account for half of all of the world's tantalums. Oil, Nigeria, Angola, Algeria have big storehouses of oil. Nigeria, in fact, is an oil superpower. Gold, Africa has about 30% of the world's gold, of which Ghana has the most. So Ghana, South Africa and Mali, which is also war-torn. And this is also where the next war for resources are not just for old precious resources, but the new precious resources, critical minerals will be fought. And that is where the Chinese have taken the lead already. And that's where the Western world has a lot of catching up to do. And that's where frankly, India also, which works in alliance with the world, also has much catching up to do. And that's the reason while this idea of bringing African Union also as a member of G20 and thereby making it G21 has gone like knife through butter so far, unless there is a veto. But I don't see any country right now exercising the veto power. There might be some delays, etc., that I can't rule out, because some cussed nations might want to say, China for example, might want to say that why should India get this credit? So they might delay it, but Africa, for the African nations to join this global community, this multilateral, truly multilateral and global organization, that time has now come, and it's a good thing that India is in the lead, and that's why Prime Minister Modi is holding a bilateral with the leader of a tiny island state